I think this is the last English workshop of this series. We may have a single workshop next month, but you will receive the circular after this workshop is over. Now, religion is quite a vast topic, and Krishnaji has said that religion is the key which opens the door to all our problems, and therefore it is necessary that we should understand what is true religion, because without understanding that, we may not be able to handle our problems, may not be able to solve our problems. So that is one aspect of this topic. I mean, Krishnaji has defined religion as to gather all your energy. Now, it will be very interesting to start with that definition and then how that definition serves as a key to open the doors of all our problems. So that exercise we are going to do not in this session, but maybe in the next session or the session next to that. How the religion can open door to all our problems and how it can cover the whole of our life, starting with the definition which Krishnaji has given. But in this first session, we are going to consider some basic things related to religion. One of the aspects which is part of religion is the ethics and the morality. And why should a human being behave at all? And why should he have criteria according to which he should behave himself, and so on? If he is going to live a free life, then in that free life, what is the place of ethics and morality? That means, does the human behavior need to be controlled, or a human being can live an uncontrolled life? Why should he restrict himself with all codes of conduct which are regarded as the ethical and moral codes? Can he live without that, or does he need any kind of guideline for living his life? So that is one of the major issues that needs to be explored before we understand the need for religion. And there is also the aspect of God, because almost every religion has talked about God. Maybe they have described their God in a different way. But what is the place of God? Is there such a thing as God? And why does human being need this God? So all that also is one needs to inquire into, because that also forms a part of religion. And then there is another aspect which Krishnaji talks about as the truth or the sacred. Now, what is this truth or the sacred? Is it different from God? And what is its place in human life? So all that also one needs to go into. That will more or less complete our inquiry into the religion. And of course, we have to also inquire into what is the quality of a religious mind. Krishnaji has talked extensively about what is a religious mind. And I think it will be worthwhile to go into that with some details so that we understand what he meant by a religious mind and whether we have a religious mind or not. So I think the first thing we have to tackle is this code of conduct. Why should human beings behave? I mean, how are the human beings going to judge themselves? What is going to be their standard? Now, is that standard made by the human beings themselves? That means they make the standard, and according to that standard, they judge themselves and then consider themselves as good or bad or whatever it is. So if they are going to decide the standard, then it means that the man is measure to himself. That means there is no control, there is no other agency which can decide how a human being should behave. It is the human being himself who is going to decide what is going to be his morality, what is going to be his ethical code, what he should be doing, what he should not be doing. So if everything is decided by man, that means the man has become the measure for himself. There is no other measure, only the measure which he has decided. And according to that only, he is going to judge himself. And so if that is the situation, then that code of conduct or that morality is almost meaningless. Because we have seen the human beings have formulated laws and codes of conduct according to their convenience, according to what they want. So if many human beings want to live together in the form of a society, and for the existence of society, the human beings have to take some responsibility of the group life, in the sense that every human being doesn't have to keep on doing every kind of work that is required for its survival, for his survival. But the work can be distributed. And then that is how the social structure comes into being. So where you do certain kind of work for the other members of the society, and they do certain other kind of work for you. And that is how the society exists. And then because there has to be some kind of order, and then there is a order enforcing agency, which is the governing agency, the rulers. So the rulers will govern by formulating various laws and rules, and there with a provision of punishment if the law is broken. But in that kind of arrangement, you can always break a law without getting discovered, without being found. So a person will behave as long as he is being watched, and then he may not behave when he is sure that he is not being watched. So a lot of crimes are committed, lot of irregular things done without getting detected. And so therefore, the rule of law has its own limitations. They say that the rule of law is for the good citizens, but for a bad person, there is no law. He can just behave the way he wants to and get undetected, and therefore escape the punishment. So there is this big drawback in the rule of law. But then when you talk about religion and when you talk about God and some kind of agency which can punish you for your misdeeds, and you cannot go undetected from these agencies. That means you cannot hide yourself from God because He knows everything, He can see everything. He is omniscient, omnipresent, and all the big qualities He has. So it's not possible to hide yourself from Him. And since you are committing an irregular thing or a crime or some bad act, then you will be detected by Him and therefore you will be punished. So then, breaking a law or misbehaving without being detected is not possible when God is the agency to control your behavior. So that was the role which most of the religions played. Wherever the king failed, the rulers failed, the religions came to their rescue, and then by generating fear in the minds of the people about God and the way He is going to punish, so they made the people behave. So there again, it is the human beings who are going to decide what is a good behavior and what is a bad behavior. And then in different societies, the different human beings will have different criteria for what is good and what is bad. So something good in one kind of society may be bad in another kind of society. So if you examine the various religions and the code of conduct specified by them and the culture that grew as a result of that religion, so you will find lots of traditions, lots of acts which people simply accept because they consider themselves as belonging to that religion. And these acts may be not right, they may be all wrong, but because their religion is emphasizing that they are the right thing, therefore they have to simply accept it. So that is where we find the different religions in the world having their different codes of conduct, and wherever these codes of conduct come in conflict with each other, then we have a conflict between various religions. So the religions, they have worked in dividing the human beings. So they have divided the humanity into various sects, into various parts. Each part is labeled as a section of society belonging to that particular religion. And all these parts, they are not in harmony with each other, but they are in conflict with each other because they have conflicting codes of conduct. Now, if you want to have some unified religion where there could be a common code of conduct which has to be followed by every human being, doesn't matter which religion he belongs to, then that also is not going to work because after all it is the human beings who are going to decide that code of conduct. And whatever is agreed upon or decided, that can be always disagreed upon later on if it is found that it is not convenient to follow that. And it is very obvious. We do say that one should always speak truth, but then when it is not convenient to speak truth, a person lies. He is untruthful because to speak truth is not convenient to him at that point or in that situation. So the code of conduct or morality decided by human beings, created by human beings, actually is no morality at all, because all the rules and regulations can be changed, can be broken anytime. That is why Krishnaji says that the social morality is no morality at all. It is immorality, because everything is done as per one's convenience. So no rules and regulations decided by human beings can be a fundamental criterion of behavior for human beings, because all those criteria are decided randomly only with a view of convenience to the human beings who are deciding those rules. And whenever it is not convenient, they will break those rules. And therefore, that morality is no morality at all. And we have also seen that human beings, although they are technologically advanced, psychologically they are very primitive. They have not advanced at all. And it is the psychological nature which mostly decides what a human being is going to do. And so all the rules and regulations which are formulated by human beings are also decided by this psychological nature. So the technology is only merely used what human beings want psychologically. To achieve that, they are using the technology. If they want to kill other human beings, then they are going to use the technology to kill other human beings. So technology is actually not deciding the behavior of human beings, but the human beings, according to their behavior, according to their psychological makeup or structure, are going to use the technology to further their own psychological goals. And hence, technology cannot establish the code of conduct, or there is no morality or ethics involved in technology. Technology is just the knowledge and the techniques, but how they will be used is decided by the psychological aspect of human beings. The psychological aspect being self-centered and therefore always divisive, and therefore any code of conduct decided by this psychological aspect will only create more chaos and more conflict, because it is basically divisive. And therefore, all the existing religions, whatever code of conduct they have prescribed, whatever morality they talk about, is not of much use, because people know that without following all those rules and regulations also, they can live comfortably. And so we have these different kinds of societies existing in the world. There are technologically advanced countries, and they know that using technology they can just do anything, and they are not answerable to anybody for that matter. So they can just do anything, they can just live exactly the way they want to live. So that given rise to a permissive kind of society where everything is permitted. You just live exactly the way you want to live. and that's the end of it. So there is no code of conduct, there is nothing. You do what you want to do. You live exactly the way you want to live. And that is called as the freedom. So we have won that kind of society, and all the technology is used to live the way you want to live. And then there is also a reaction to this technological advancement where people believe in all kinds of things. So they become more fanatic, they become more religious, they hold tightly to all their code of conduct which is prescribed by their religion. And then they live a very limited, fanatic kind of life. But these people then, they also come in conflict with the other people who are not living according to their religion. So in any case, there is a conflict. Either you live exactly the way you want to live with taking advantage of all the technology, but that also doesn't lead you anywhere. Because there is, if you observe people living like that, you will find that there is no depth to their life. They are given into all kinds of pleasure sensations which work for a limited period of time, and then they are subject to a lot of depression and loneliness, all the psychological problems. They are then with those problems, they can't resolve those, and their life may end in some kind of asylum. So a life given to pleasure, doing exactly what one wants to do, has its own consequences. And the life which is highly restricted by code of conduct also has its own consequences. And any kind of life lived in this way, according to the rules and codes of conduct were made or produced by human beings themselves, is going to be a very limited life leading to conflict between different sections of society. Because there may not be an agreement among the whole of humanity as to what should be the rule and what should not be the rule. Because everybody will be thinking according to his personal interest, his personal motives. So therefore, morality decided by thought, morality decided by or imposed by the society, Krishnaji calls it as immorality, because it has emerged basically from the self-centered nature of human beings. It has been designed mostly to further one's own selfish interest. And when one is pursuing one's own selfish interest, then he is only going to generate more chaos and conflict and wars in the society. And that is why the question arises whether there can be a morality or ethical behavior which is not decided by human beings, which is not decided by thought. So in the nature itself, is there such a code of conduct? Is there such a morality? If it is inherent in nature, then it is not a question of you and me deciding about it. Then it is the very nature, it is the arrangement, it is the order of the nature. So it is not as per one's likes and dislikes. The whole of humanity may disagree with that natural order. and yet it will not make any difference as far as that natural order is concerned. So, can there be a morality which is the outcome of these natural laws and therefore not decided by human beings according to their own selfish interests? So, are there natural laws? Now, in the field of technology, we do see that there are natural laws. We have law of gravity, we have law of electromagnetic induction. We have so many different laws or principles which have been discovered through careful research. And then we understand those laws of science in the field of technology. And we do make use of those laws to create or to invent lots of things to make our life more and more comfortable, more and more enjoyable, and so on. So certainly in the field of technology, there are laws which exist. But then the human psychological nature is such that although there is an order as far as technology is concerned, the human beings use this technology to further their psychological disorder. That means a technology can produce a complete order at the physical level, but the human psychological nature will not let it happen, because the human psychological nature is basically divisive, and that psychological division leading to conflict, and that conflict is going to prevent any sustainable order in the human society. So the society will not be in harmony. There will be a chaos, there will be conflict, and there will be a destruction. So living exactly according to technology is maybe living as per the laws of nature. But then there is a human psychological nature which seems to fall outside the realm of these laws of nature. So does that mean that the human psychological nature is, or it can be just what it can be? That means there are no laws, there are no rules, there is no order as far as that is concerned. So is that so? So that gives rise to this very important question. It means that, are there laws of nature even in the psychological realm? Just as there are laws of nature at the physical level, are there laws of nature at the psychological level also? And if there are laws of nature at psychological level, then that becomes the criterion for human behavior. Because if you go against the law, then you have to suffer the consequences. And if you don't want those consequences, then you have to obey the law. So there is no imposition, there is no fear, there is no belief required. All that you need is to find out whether there are laws of nature in the psychological realm. And if there are, then that becomes the criterion for human behavior. Because if you don't behave as per those laws, then you are going to suffer. You are going to face the consequences. So it is not that due to fear of the consequences you behave. Because even in the technology, you behave out of your understanding of technology and not out of fear. Like say, you know that touching fire burns your hand. Right? So therefore, you don't touch the fire. So not to touch fire becomes your code of conduct. But is that based on the fear of fire? You are not afraid of fire. You understand that touching the fire burns your hand, and therefore you avoid touching it. Or if you want to touch it, then you have to have certain kind of mechanism according to which you can touch it without burning your hand. So there you are not touching the fire because you are afraid of fire, but you are not touching the fire because you understand that touching the fire means burning your hand, and you don't want to get your hand burnt. Therefore, you don't touch. So therefore, there is no question of fear there. You know how to handle fire. So here, when you understand that there are certain laws of nature, even in the psychological realm, and if those laws are not understood and followed, then it will have consequences, and those consequences you will have to suffer. You can't avoid the consequences, because laws of nature are such that you cannot avoid the consequences. If you do an act A, then it will be invariably followed by the result B. It can never happen that A has happened without the B. So natural laws, they are of that type. They are not like human-made laws. Human-made laws, you can disobey a law and yet escape the punishment. But in nature, it's not so. If you touch the fire, your hand will get burnt. If you do an act, then you'll have to inevitably go through the consequences. So, if there are laws of nature in the psychological realm, then that could be the basis of morality, which then will not be according to my like or your like or dislike, which will be common to all human beings, whether they like it or they don't like it, whether they agree upon it or don't agree upon it, because that is the law of nature. Law of nature doesn't consider whether that law is acceptable to you or not acceptable to you, whether you like it or you don't like it. It is there, and it is as per that total order which exists in the cosmos, in the nature. So these laws of nature, they are the outcome of that order. So can there be some laws of nature even in the psychological realm? So how does one discover it? How does one come upon it? And one of the obvious approach could be to find out through Krishnaji's literature. Krishnaji has talked a lot about these things, and therefore, naturally, since we are studying Krishnamurti, we want to find out whether he has mentioned any such laws, any such things in his teachings. which can then become the criterion for human behavior. Now, there are certain such statements of Krishnaji which can be taken as law. Not that we are taking them as laws, but Krishnaji himself has said that it is the law. So we are not imagining that these statements of Krishnaji can be taken as laws. And to give an example, one of his statements where he says that where there is psychological division, there must be conflict. And when he makes that statement, he says that it is the law. It's not some imagined statement. It is not my wish. But he says that is the law. That means wherever there is psychological division, there must be conflict. So if it is a law, it means that it cannot happen that there is a psychological division and there is no conflict. Because we have said that if the condition A exists, then the consequence B also must exist. But that is the nature of law. That is how the natural laws they function. So here the condition is that the psychological division. That is the condition. So if psychological division exists, then the result, the consequence, which is the conflict. And therefore the conflict must also exist. So if there is a psychological division, then there must be conflict. And that is the natural law. So people who are divided psychologically within themselves and now are working or talking about having some kind of universal order in the world, right? Then all their efforts to establish such order will come to nothing, because they are psychologically divided, and therefore that psychological division must lead to conflict. So they won't be able to establish any such world order because of psychological division. So this is one law, one, you can say, law of nature in the psychological realm, where one says that if there is a psychological division, then there has to be a conflict. And then conflict means we know what happens when there is a conflict. Then there is another one. That means if you desire something, then you get bound to that something. That means there is a bondage between you and that object, and that bondage or that bond is to the desire. So desire binds a human being with his object, and therefore if you desire something, then you go after that something to possess it, to achieve it, to have it, and then that action will have its own consequences which cannot be avoided. Because just pursuing one's objects of desire can give rise to many other psychological reactions. You desire an object and somebody comes in the way of you achieving or possessing that object, then naturally you get angry with that person. You become violent towards that person. You desire an object, you don't have it, but somebody else has it. Therefore, you feel jealous about that person. So, just one situation where you are desiring something can give rise to all the other psychological reactions. So that is again, you can say, another law of nature. Then Krishnaji talks about you are the world and the world is you. So he talks about the psychological indivisibility of human beings or humanity. So psychologically, they are the same. They are not different from each other. So actually, they are not divisible psychologically because they are the same. They share the same content. So in that sense, they are individuals. That means they are indivisible. But we work against that law. We consider ourselves as separate. We consider ourselves as isolated, different. And therefore, we generate the consequences of not following that law. And then there are so many other things. So this, you are the world and the world is you, it also implies that whatever is not good for the other is also not good for you. So this is also very interesting. We always want the other person to be truthful to us, but then we don't feel that we need to be truthful to the other person. Now this is a violation of this law, because we consider that to be truthful is good for the other person. But then by being untruthful, I say to myself, but truthfulness is not good for me. While the law says that whatever is good for the other is also good for you, whatever is not good for the other person is not good for you also. So untruthfulness is not good for another person, then untruthfulness is also not good for you. So which means that I also should not be untruthful. But then we behave contrary to that. We expect truthfulness from the other persons, while we don't mind being untruthful at times. So, and this seems to have become our nature, in the sense that even when there is no need to tell untruth, we simply say it because we are habituated to it. It may be some trivial matter, but in that trivial matter, you don't have to speak untruth, because even if you speak truth, that is okay, it's not going to harm you or harm anybody. And yet in such matters also, many times we speak untruth. So that has become our habit. So whatever is not good for others is not good for you. if you understand this law, then you will not do anything which you don't want the other person to do to yourself. Now, there may be many more such laws, and it's not that you have to obey the law, but if you understand the law with all its consequences and its nature, then you can behave intelligently, because then you are not obeying the law. Obeying the law doesn't demand any understanding of the law, but understanding of the law, out of that understanding emerges a behavior which is not just obeying, but which is intelligent behavior. And therefore, it doesn't become a bondage. I mean, consider somebody tells you some rule and you simply follow it without understanding it. Then you become an obedient student of that teacher, because it is the teacher who understands, and he is stating his understanding in the form of some statement, in the form of some rule. And the student, without understanding the rule, simply follows it because the teacher has told him. So by following that rule, he gets the benefits of obeying that rule. But then that doesn't develop anything in him. So he becomes an obedient student, but he doesn't become an intelligent person. So that is why it is important to understand these laws, to understand these things. And out of that understanding, and a correct action will emerge. Now, so far we have been considering our psychological nature as inevitable, and we have been believing that it cannot be changed, nothing can be done about it. The human psychological nature is unchangeable. So one is born with it. One has to just put up with it in some way or other. We have to keep on making all kinds of adjustments and continue with whatever one is born psychologically. So that is how the general human thinking has been, that it's not possible to change a human being psychologically. But here comes a man called Krishnamurti, and he questions this belief, he questions this whole thing. And he points out that, yes, it is possible for a human being to change psychologically. It's not possible to change another person psychologically, but it is possible for oneself to change oneself psychologically. And that is where and how does one go about it, that he has indicated. So which means that the human beings don't have to decide the code of conduct, the moral laws and rules, but probably it is already there in the nature, which is irrespective of what human beings think about or what they want. And if one doesn't understand these laws, right, it doesn't mean that one will escape the consequences, because these laws, they don't take into account whether you understand them or you don't understand them. They merely say that if the cause A is there, then the effect B must be followed, irrespective of whether that cause exists without your knowledge or with your knowledge or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. And therefore, although human beings were living their life in their own way, they were not able to live exactly the way they want. The things did not happen exactly the way they wanted them to happen, because there were factors which were not understood by them and which were influencing the events in their life. And therefore, they could take care of only the known factors, but the unknown factors they couldn't consider, and those unknown factors then they influenced the event in their own way, then which then doesn't go exactly the way one wants it to go. So even in the psychological realm, there are laws. There is a natural order. And if one understands the way nature functions, even in the psychological realm, then it is possible for oneself to change. And then that can become the criterion or basis of human behavior. And that basis is not decided by human beings, but that basis is inherent in the whole order of nature. And therefore, nobody can do anything about it except to understand and to live out of that understanding. So I have considered this point somewhere, because this is very important. It means that the human beings just can't live arbitrarily or randomly the way they want, because there is a natural order, and therefore laws emerging out of that natural order, and such behavior will have its own consequences, and going through those consequences, maybe the human beings will learn about these laws, and then out of understanding they will live according to those laws. So I would like you to ask questions on this point, because I think this is a very important aspect, because most of the religions, they are based on this code of conduct, and the technology and the achievement of human beings in the field of technology has discarded all these code of conducts, because they find that even if they don't follow this code of conducts, no harm comes to them. They can just enjoy life the way they want to. And therefore, that creating a sense that human beings just can do anything and not answerable to anybody or any system or any agency. So that is not so, is what we were trying to understand, because there is a natural order even in the psychological realm. There are laws there also. And if we want to live intelligently, then we have to understand those laws. Those laws, you can see them when you observe your day-to-day interactions, when you observe your behavior in your relationship with others. So I think this point should be understood as much clearly as possible, because then we'll be able to go further. Once we have understood this, then there will be no doubt as to why one has to do this. So please do ask questions.
Morning.
Yeah.
Yes, Hemant.
Yeah.
My first question is that if we live in psychological world for 24 hours, is not psychological change is important by changing our thoughts?
No, but how are you going to change your thoughts? Again, according to your thoughts. See, anyway, we are living as per our psychological nature. Whatever is our psychological nature, as per that we are living. Right? And that is what is generating a lot of chaos and conflicts and problems in our life. Now, if we want to understand these, so that there is no longer any conflict and problem in our life, then one has to understand how these things they function, how the psychological nature functions, and how it generates the psychological problems. So one has to understand then the nature of this psychological existence of human beings. So there is no point in formulating thoughts about the psychological content or about the psychological aspect, because those thoughts are by the same entity who is not different than psychological nature. That means the psychological nature itself is deciding the rules and regulations, do's and don'ts, and therefore those rules will not be able to change the psychological nature, because the psychological nature itself has decided that. So therefore it will not bring any change. One may just end up in living as per those rules and regulations and yet continue psychologically as the same entity, as the same person. So what we are saying is that whether, irrespective of what I think, whether there are laws or rules which are the consequence of the natural order, which means that they are not my invention, they are not my decision, they are not as per my likes and dislikes, but whatever order in the nature exists, so they are the consequences of that order, which means that I have to understand what is natural order, and that you can understand only when you observe your day-to-day life in your relationship with others. That is where it will be visible how your psychological nature is functioning, right? How it goes about dealing with various situations, and therefore what are its tendencies, what are its nature, and that is how one comes to grips with these laws, the psychological field. So there again, you have to put aside your likes and dislikes and observe accurately as to how that psychological content is behaving, is acting, or generating consequences. So there one cannot be just accepting authority or blindly believing in something or taking things for granted. There one has to be like a scientist who doesn't accept any authority, who goes purely by observation and experimentation. And in that observation also there is a precision and there is an accuracy. So where his personal likes and dislikes are also put aside, and the facts are seen as facts. So in the same way, one has to observe one's psychological nature as one lives one's life in relationship with others. And through that observation, one will come to understand these psychological laws.
Can I read one more question from the chat?
Yeah, read.
Is the creation of the psychological separate self, the ego, also according to law of nature?
Yes, the ego got created according to laws of nature. And then that ego starts living its life and starts behaving in a certain way. And whatever happens to that ego is also the part of the laws of nature. And if the ego continues the way it is, therefore creating havoc and insecurity to humanity, right, then it is heading for its own destruction. And the survival instinct says that a living entity has to survive. And the ego, it can't survive because it is heading for its own destruction by living a self-centered life. And that is why this enquiry, and the ego has to understand why it is heading like that, why it is behaving in this way, what is its nature. And once that inquiry starts and the whole structure and nature of the ego is unraveled, then there is no more ego. It's finished. And then there is a different kind of life. So it is all part of nature. It is also, so the formation of ego is also as per laws of nature, and the dissolution of the ego is also as per the laws of nature.
Sir, may I come in here?
Yes.
Sir, the ego is created by the human thought, but how can you say the ego is as per the laws of nature?
Because the thought operates in a certain way. How does the thought operate? And the operation of thought, is it decided by human beings or it is intrinsic to the nature of thought?
Yeah, it is intrinsic to the nature of thought.
Yeah,
Agreed.
if it is intrinsic to the nature of thought, then it is the natural order.
Sir,
and therefore, it has to function. So the consequence of that kind of functioning is the formation of ego and is the creation of conflict.
yeah, thought has wrongly entered into the psychological field and created the ego and created a lot of havoc in the society. Thought has a place. It has a place in the technological world, in the physical world, but it has no place in the psychological world. And by entering into the wrong place, thought has created havoc for all human beings. Is it not?
But why do you say a wrong place or wrong thing? Why don't you say that, well, if thought functions in psychological realm, this is what happens? Now,
Yeah.
why to be judgmental about it as right and wrong? So, if you touch fire, your hand gets burned. Now, what is right
Yeah.
and wrong about this? It's just a
Oh, that is a
statement of
fact.
fact.
Yeah.
So, if this thought
Likewise,
functions in the psychological realm, then these are the consequences. This is what happens. And therefore,
yeah.
if one understands that, then probably one will also understand the place of thought and how thought would function, or the right functioning of thought. One understands, and then one goes as per that.
Hello, can you
Okay,
listen to
okay,
my?
sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there something such as one sacred consciousness or one sacred mind? And if we attune to it, so whether I doubt whether is it possible to live that the life without any conflict and without any
Yeah,
so
actually, we have not gone into what is the sacred. When we are going to go into it, we have 3 more sessions. So just now we were only trying to explore whether there can be a natural criterion for human behavior, which is not decided by human beings, but which is naturally there, so that we don't have to have different religions in the world according to different beliefs, according to different customs, traditions, right? You have to just understand these basic laws of nature and live as per those laws, and then there is order in the world. So there is no need of different religions and that kind of thing at all. And also there is no question of some people accepting or some people rejecting. There cannot be such a question because the consequences are inescapable. And therefore, either one goes with those laws, or if one goes against those laws, then one has to suffer. So our main focus in this session was whether there is a natural criterion for human behavior, which means that if there is such a criterion, then human beings can't behave arbitrarily. They can't behave just according to what they like and dislike, because that criterion will create consequences if they don't behave as per that criteria. And those consequences may not be acceptable to human beings, because that may involve a lot of suffering, a lot of pain.
So every
yes,
religion says, every religion says that its
Yes.
do's and don'ts have
Yes.
emerged from the natural order.
Yeah.
So one doesn't need to inquire into the natural order, but simply follow the instructions that are given. Same way, even Krishnaji's statements like "you are the world and the world is you," where there is desire, where there is duality, there is conflict. So what's the difference?
Yeah, the difference is that Krishnaji doesn't say that you have to accept this. He says question it, test it, find out, understand it, and then out of that you will live. While the traditional religions, there is no place for questioning. They claim whatever they are saying, they claim that it is originated from the divine. And whatever has originated from the divine, you cannot question it. Either you have to simply accept and follow it, or if you reject, then you will be punished. If not punished by God, we will punish you. So that is how they put it. And that makes the whole difference. Because what the traditional religions are demanding is a blind faith. And acceptance that whatever they say has the divine origin. Now, both these things are questionable. Krishnaji doesn't say any of those things. He points out and he warns that don't accept it because I am saying it. Test the truth of it. Test it in your own life. Observe it, understand it. And out of that, then you may change your behavior. Out of that understanding, you may live your life. So there is a completely different approach here.
Sir, also Krishnaji doesn't encourage groupism, which is the basis of other religion. My religion, your religion.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
He tells you to be alone.
Yeah.
And just understand yourself.
Yeah.
So you don't become a Krishnite. You become only yourself.
That's right. Yes.
Sir, understanding laws in science or nature is easy, but understanding psychological laws is not that easy. Furthermore, the understanding of science law is mechanical based on thought.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a interesting statement. Nice way of pointing out the difference. So the word understanding functions differently in the field of knowledge and in the psychological realm. In the technological field, the understanding is in terms of knowledge, while in the psychological realm, the understanding doesn't require knowledge at all. And as the questioner has rightly said, that understanding in psychological realm seems to be far more difficult than the understanding in the technological realm. And that is mainly because we are not willing to look at the psychological reaction exactly as it is. The unwillingness to look at the psychological reaction as it is makes the understanding of that reaction difficult. And just to give you an example, say because of some reason you get angry, but then somebody points out to you that why are you getting angry? Why are you angry? Then although you are angry, you don't accept, you don't take that statement. If somebody points out to you, why are you angry? Then you say that, no, I am not angry. You are making me angry. Actually, I am not angry. Now, this kind of behavior, it only shows that although I am angry, I am not willing to look at that anger. In fact, I am saying that I am not angry. That means I am not even willing to look at it. And maybe if I had noticed by myself, maybe I would have looked at that anger. But when somebody has pointed it out to me that I am angry, and it didn't come to my notice on my own that I am angry, and somebody pointing it out to me, so which means that it goes against my ego. Somebody pointing out to me that I am angry is taken as something derogatory, taken as something, some weakness of the ego. Because if ego were strong, it itself could have found out that I am angry. And even before somebody could notice it, the ego would have controlled it. So the nature of ego is such. And then a simple reaction as anger, the person is not willing to look at it or observe it as anger. Right? So that is what makes the understanding in psychological realm as very, very difficult. Because it all depends on what the ego wants. And what the ego wants may be far, far away from the understanding. But ego only wants a satisfaction, ego only wants to further itself. And if understanding is going to challenge that, then maybe ego doesn't want understanding. So that is why it is very, very difficult to understand in the psychological realm. In technological realm, the understanding is based on knowledge, and it's there is some kind of mechanism according to which one can understand in terms of knowledge.
Sir, I'll read the next question.
Yeah.
Has the daily flow of thoughts in our mind have anything to do with our naturally inherited capabilities?
Daily flow of thought, anything to do
In our
with?
mind, do with our natural inherited capabilities.
Yes, probably it has got to do with the naturally inherited capabilities and also naturally inherited conditioning, the psychological conditioning, and also with all the capacities and all those things. So what we think that the flow of thought is as per our conditioning and as per the situation around us at that time. Because as a conditioned human being, I have inherited everything that human consciousness is to offer. So all that has been already inherited. But then out of all that inherited thing, what will exactly become active will depend on the situation at that time. So if the situation is provocative to certain types of reactions, then I will find that those kinds of reactions, they emerge in me. And I start reacting according to that. And then I also inherited certain capabilities, certain capacities, certain talents. And those talents will also function depending upon the situation. So whatever situation demands that particular talent or skill to handle that situation, then those skills, they will become active and then they will function in that situation. So it is both whatever we have inherited in terms of content of consciousness, which includes our psychological tendencies and which also includes various skills and talents. All that becomes active as per the given situation. And therefore, there is a constant flow of thought and psychological reactions and the corresponding physical acts. So there is a constant flow of that. That is what constitutes our daily life.
So nice explanation. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The ego resists change when challenged by natural order. What is course of action? We can't seek refuge in clever wordplay or our deep-rooted faith in traditional religion or even senior status in hierarchy.
So there is one content in that question which says that when the ego is challenged by natural laws. Now the natural laws, they don't challenge anything or anybody. They are what they are. Now it is the ego which feels challenged because those laws, they come in the way of what it wants to achieve. The ego wants to achieve something and it is unable to achieve it because of certain natural laws. Then it gets challenged. As far as the laws in the technology are concerned, there is still a scope for the ego to find out more knowledge, do more research, and overcome that obstruction. So any challenge by natural laws can be overcome in that way as far as technological realm is concerned. But psychological realm is a bit tricky, because in psychological realm, the ego may be able to achieve what it wants psychologically, and yet there will be consequences of that achievement also. And therefore, the situation is not exactly same as the situation in technological realm. But how often in psychological realm you achieve something psychologically, and once you have achieved it, you find that your achievement is nothing, because only after achieving you realize that it was not worth achieving. And so the consequences are different. One may do the pursuit of pleasure, the psychological realm, but after pursuing pleasure, one comes to the pain. And when you suffer pain, you realize that it was not worth pursuing that pleasure. So there are such things. So the ego, as per its conditioning, right, is always after something. But when it does achieve that something, the result is the suffering. And therefore, its achievement comes to nothing. And maybe sometime the ego may realize that whatever it touches brings only sorrow. And therefore, then it is not willing to go after anything, which means it becomes then inactive.
May I ask you one question, sir?
Yes, Barve sir, please ask.
There is a saying, if you are in Rome, be a Roman. That means in what type of group you are talking or sitting or discussing or in the society,
Yes.
be comfortable with that and try to understand and live
Yes.
comfortably and happily. Does it
Yes.
mean, is it something related to this?
Not actually. Actually, what you are saying is that whatever society we are living in, then just be comfortable with that society and live comfortably. It only means that one has to conform with that group of persons, that society. And as long as you are conforming to that society, then there is no problem for you, in the sense that the society looks after your comforts and so on. But if you don't conform, then there is a problem. Then a person becomes not a part of that society, but an outsider. And then everybody else in that society is confronting him because he doesn't conform with what the society stands for. So I think as long as one is living a mechanical life and not that much sensitive, then maybe what you have said, maybe that is what happens. But as one is exploring into oneself, one is understanding, and therefore one also understands the consequences of conforming to that social order. And one finds it very difficult to conform. And without conforming, it's not possible to live in that society. Then probably it's time for that person to move out of that and then live as per his inquiry, as per his understanding. And then he doesn't have to conform. He can live as per laws of nature.
तर आपण ज्या मराठीमध्ये बोललं चालेल का?
बोला की.
हा, तर आपण एखाद्या ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल मध्ये बसलो असेल एखादा मनुष्य आणि ते फार इंटेलिजंट माणसं असते, तर त्या ग्रुपमध्ये तुम्हाला त्या टाईपमध्ये बोलावं लागेल, because you can understand them and whatever you are saying they will be able to understand it. But the same situation तुम्ही एखाद्या कमी बुद्धिमान लोकांच्या ग्रुपमध्ये बसला असाल आणि तुम्ही इंटेलिजंट असाल, तर त्यांना तुमचं बोलणं समजणार नाही किंवा ते काही जे बोलतील ते तुम्हाला समजणार नाही. मग या ग्रुपमध्ये माझी सायकोलॉजिकल बिहेवियर असं पाहिजे की मी उगीच चिडून जायचं काही कारण नाहीये. ओके, ठीक आहे असं म्हणून मी त्यांच्याशी कॉन्व्हर्सेशन चालू ठेवायला पाहिजे. ह्या टाईपमध्ये जर आपण बिहेवियर, शेवटी काय आहे, आफ्टर ऑल इट इज यू वॉन्ट टू बिकम, यू हॅव टू मेक युअर लाईफ कम्फर्टेबल विदाउट गेटिंग अँग्री अँड ऑल दॅट. सो इफ यू बिहेव लाईक दिस, then that is your psychological understanding of the particular group, and according to that you can be comfortable. This is what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Is it somewhat related to what we are discussing now?
Yeah, I would like to go more into it to bring out certain points. Because what you have said is what normally happens when one has to just adjust, because one cannot escape from the given situation, particularly when you are put up with other people in the family itself. Then you can't escape the family. You have to live with them. But what we are saying is this, that because you have made two things. You said that the others are not that much intellectual, so they don't understand what you are talking about. But the other statement which you said, that therefore you also don't understand what they are talking about, that statement is not correct. Because an intelligent person can understand an unintelligent person also. But an unintelligent person cannot understand the intelligent person. So one part of your statement is correct, that is, those unintelligent people cannot understand the intelligent people. But the intelligent person cannot understand the unintelligent person. That is not correct. He understands them also. So he understands their situation. He understands why they are behaving like that. He also understands why they are demanding certain things from him and so on. So he understands their full situation. Now, as per that understanding, he will decide according to his priorities. When, for example, if his priority is the psychological freedom, then he will not accept anything from those persons which will jeopardize his psychological freedom. So psychological freedom must be guarded at all costs. So which means that if they ask you to believe in this and believe in that, you will just discard it. You will say, why should I believe? Right? But you may not mention it to them. Right? But within you, you don't believe in anything. Within you, you are psychologically free. But outwardly, right, you may not express it unless it is necessary to express. So if they ask you to do certain thing, and if you find that that action is not right as per your understanding, then you may politely refuse it. You may say that, well, I don't want to do it, or I don't feel it is right. But you can do it politely. So an intelligent person is able to live or behave without coming in conflict with others. And that is his nature. Because just as he cannot compromise on his psychological freedom, he also cannot compromise on psychological conflict. So not to come in conflict with others. So if they are doing some puja in the house, I don't believe in puja, right? So I don't have to participate in that. But if I don't participate, they are going to get hurt. So I don't want to hurt them. So I just sit there and observe whatever that is going on. While within me, I'm completely free of it. It doesn't mean anything to me. So there may be many such things, right, which they don't mean anything to me. But yet, for the sake of not hurting others, what they are doing, right? Therefore, I just participate in that. But there again, there is a criterion that such participation should not contradict your understanding of life. For example, if participating in an act amounts to a lot of violence, right, then one will simply refuse to participate. Doesn't matter what the other people think, because any kind of violence is not acceptable. So an intelligent person, he understands the situation, he understands the nature, the psychological behavior of others in the group, and therefore he also understands where to go with the group and where he doesn't have to go with the group, and so on. So I think the intelligence makes all the difference. One doesn't have to conform with a group. It's only when one doesn't understand, then the question of conformity comes. But if one understands, then one doesn't have to confirm it. Then it's just a matter of the consequences of one's action. That will decide whether one wants to act in that way or not.
Yes, sir. For example, when my mother died, my father asked me to do the Shraddha Puja, and called the Bhaji and all that. And now we do it every year, but I don't believe in it. But because the others want it and it becomes a sort of get together, I do the puja.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Sir, can I read this question?
Yeah, please.
If in awareness we want something, that is desire, and ready to face the consequence, is it not okay?
Yeah, it's okay. If you say that, well, I want this and I don't mind facing the consequences, well, you are free to go ahead and have it and also face the consequences. There is nothing. If somebody wants to say that I want to touch the fire, I accept if my hand gets burnt. Right? Then the nature doesn't say that, no, don't touch. It says, well, you are welcome. So you touch the fire and get your hand burnt also. So it's okay. So natural laws are like that. There is no imposition. There is complete freedom.
Sometimes it is needed, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe sometimes necessary to learn certain lesson. Maybe one has to go through all that experience. And therefore one deliberately makes a mistake. Yeah.
Question is also there. In organization, there is code of conducts. Because it's necessary, it is part of system. So our family is also a system. So can't we set some code of conducts in our family to run it smoothly?
Yeah, I mean, the code of conduct anyway will be set up as per your understanding. So if say there are 4 or 5 members in the family, each one has its own understanding. So they come together and they set up some code of conduct, say that, okay, in our family when we are living together, so this is what is allowed, this is what is not allowed, and so on. And so then that is the mutual agreement, and as per that you live. So that more or less does away with any conflict which may arise due to these trivial things, So if one accepts that code of conduct, the life becomes much smoother. Right? But still, there will be some psychological events where there is no clear mutual understanding, and that is where then one has to observe and try to understand the situation. But common routine things, yes, it is quite nice to have those kinds of regulations to avoid the avoidable conflicts, For example, one such rule is that there are many persons staying in the family, then no one should touch the other fellow's things without his permission or without his knowledge. Or if he has to use certain item, then he has to inform that person that he is using it. And after using, he has to keep it in the same place, so that the other person, when he needs it, he doesn't have to go on looking for it all over the house because he knows where exactly it is to be kept. So some such simple rule makes the life much more comfortable. But otherwise, then you'll have to, every time you need something, you have to go on looking for it because you don't know where exactly it is. Somebody may have used it and he may have placed it somewhere else and you don't know where he has put it. So you have to again go on looking for it, or you have to ask that person, where did you keep this? So some such minor rules, minor code of conduct can make group life on daily basis quite comfortable. So that is okay. But psychologically, whether there is a need to form such rules, right? So that is left to each individual, how he would behave psychologically in the family. There are certain things. Yeah, go ahead, Vijayji.
Krishnaji himself was against the concept of family. He said it was the smallest and first unit which divided man from man.
Yeah. So forget the word about family, but what we are saying is that whenever you are living with other human beings, right? Forget the family and all those things. But when you are living with the other human beings, then certain kind of understanding, right? It does help in smoothing out or in avoiding the conflicts, the small conflicts. Otherwise, if you need something and you are unable to find it because somebody has misplaced it, and then because of that you get irritated, and out of that irritation then you are in conflict with that person. So the whole family atmosphere, or the whole atmosphere of the group is vitiated. Now that is avoidable if some such simple rules are followed. परवेश सर, तुम्ही काय विचारू इच्छिता?
मला विचारायचं.
विचारा की.
इंटेलिजन्स ही पहिली गोष्ट म्हणजे सायकोलॉजिकल एंटिटी आहे का, आणि दुसरी गोष्ट म्हणजे ती नॅचरल सायकोलॉजिकल एंटिटी आहे का, वेदर इट इज अ सायकोलॉजिकल एंटिटी ॲट ऑल.
No, it is not psychological. Intelligence is not a psychological entity. Intelligence is beyond the psychological realm, and that is why it is possible to understand the total psychological content. Because if intelligence is within the psychological field, then it cannot completely understand the psychological content, because it is part of that field. And if it is part of that field, it is already a fragment. Now, a fragment cannot understand the whole. So, if intelligence is part of the psychological realm, then that intelligence cannot understand completely the psychological realm, because then that intelligence is just one of the fragments of the psychological content, and the fragment cannot understand the whole. So intelligence is outside the psychological realm, and therefore it is able to look at the psychological realm as a whole. It's a different dimension. From that different dimension, you are able to look at the whole field of consciousness, and therefore understand it holistically. So it is like, say, you are in the ground, so your vision is very much limited. You can't see the whole of it. But when you are in the aeroplane at a height, then you can see the whole landscape with all its details. So you have the vision of the whole landscape, which is not possible if you are in the landscape itself. If you are standing on the ground, then you may not have the whole view of the landscape. right? You can only see part of the landscape. But when you are in the aeroplane far above at certain height, then you can have the whole view of the landscape. And so that height is the different dimension than the plane. Plane has 2 dimensions. The height is the 3rd dimension. So you are in a different dimension. So from that you can have the whole view. So in the same way, in the intelligence, which is not part of the psychological realm, it's a completely different dimension. And therefore, from that different dimension, you can have the whole vision or whole look of the psychological realm.
मग हे सायकोलॉजिकल हे जे आपण इंटेलिजन्स म्हणतोय हे बुद्धिमत्तेचे मोजमाप आहे का? आणि त्या बुद्धिमत्तेचं मोजमाप असेल तर ते तुम्ही ग्रास करून वाढवू शकता. And then from ground level you can go to the top, and because that intelligence you understand everything, असं म्हणायचंय का? आणि मग त्या इंटेलिजन्समुळे तुमची ह्युमन सायकोलॉजीचं पण अंडरस्टँडिंग होत असेल.
नाही, याच्यामध्ये मला असं म्हणायचं की जे मोजमाप आहे बुद्धिमत्तेचं आपण जे म्हणता, ती बुद्धिमत्ता ही विचार अशा लेवलची आहे, म्हणजे त्याला आपण इंटलेक्ट म्हणतो किंवा इंटेलेक्च्युअल अंडरस्टँडिंग म्हणतो. सो दॅट फंक्शन्स इन द फील्ड ऑफ नॉलेज. So there it is different, but the intelligence which we are talking about is also capable of functioning in the psychological realm, because the intellect of thought may not be able to understand the psychological realm, but the intelligence which is beyond both, it is neither in the realm of thought, it is not in the realm of psyche. It is a completely different dimension. Therefore, it is able to understand or look at the whole thing. Now, you may ask then, how does one come upon that intelligence? If it is not in the realm of thought, if it is not in the realm of consciousness or psyche, then how does one come upon it? So there, whenever you try to understand something, right, and that understanding requires a full attention to that which you want to understand. Now that kind of endeavor can somehow open up that different dimension of intelligence. So endeavor to understand something is the key, is the important thing. But if we are merely intellectually understanding, then it may not lead to that intelligence. If we are merely listening to something and simply accepting it or rejecting it based on our conditioning or our criteria, then again that intelligence will not be awakened. So
there are 2 types of knowledge: one which comes from pure observation, which results in self-understanding, and another is the capacity to gain knowledge. And that type of intellectual is one who has a greater capacity for acquiring knowledge, and someone of a lesser capacity for acquiring knowledge. So I think that word intellectual is often confused. One is confused for the other.
No, actually what we are saying is that if the knowledge is not required to understand, then what happens to the process of acquiring knowledge? If the knowledge is not required to understand something, right, then the knowledge is redundant. Then a person having a lot of skill in acquiring knowledge and understanding in terms of knowledge, now that skill is useless in a situation where the understanding doesn't require any knowledge at all.
Right, sir.
So what we are saying actually is that intelligence has a different dimension, right? It can understand in terms of knowledge also, and it can also understand where the knowledge is not required. So
beyond knowledge.
It is outside both the realms. So it can understand in terms of knowledge, and it can also understand without the knowledge.
By observation.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, Barveji.
हे जे टोटली डिफरंट डायमेन्शन जे आपण म्हणतोय इंटेलिजन्सच्या बाबतीमध्ये की हे या सर्वपेक्षा फारच वेगळं आहे. असं जर असेल तर त्याच्यामध्ये ही दैवी देणगी आहे का काय की त्या इट इज डिफरंट, इट इज ए परफेक्ट इंटेलिजन्स जो म्हणतो आपण हा फार थाड्या लोकांनाच मिळतो. असं जर म्हटलं तर वेदर इट कॅनॉट बी अचीव्ड बाय प्रॅक्टिस, तर ते निसर्गदत्त देणगी आहे का काय?
नाही, तसं नाहीये. आपल्याला असं म्हणायचं आहे की पोटेन्शियली दॅट इंटेलिजन्स इज विथ एव्हरीबडी, potentially, but whether that intelligence is awakened or not awakened depends on the kind of life that person is living. If that person is living his daily life with attention and he is understanding or trying to understand every situation and acting out of that understanding, then probably he is living in a right way, which can or which may lead to awakening of that intelligence. But if a person is merely living a life of inattention and life of insensitivity, given to pleasures and sensations, right, and mostly living inattentively, then such a person is less likely to awaken that intelligence. So now it doesn't mean that the person who has been able to awaken that intelligence had more right from birth itself. No. But from birth itself, everybody has the same potential. Every human being is capable of awakening that intelligence, right? But only those who work towards that will be able to awaken that intelligence. Those who do not work, naturally, they can't awaken. And therefore, those who, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Krishnaji himself said everybody is capable of it. Only you have to work on it. Yes. And it's ideas, but you have to work on it.
Yes, that's right. So I think the time is almost over.
Last फक्त सर एक जे फॅमिलीच्या बाबतीत
येस
कृष्णमूर्तींचं मत असं की फॅमिली सिस्टम त्यांना ऍक्सेप्ट नव्हती, पण ही फिलॉसॉफी वाटते कधी कधी मला बऱ्याच लोकांनी सांगितलं की फॅमिली सिस्टम नाही, पण आतापर्यंत हजारो वर्ष झाला आपण ऑब्झर्वच करतोय, सगळेजण ऑब्झर्व करतोय. इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल टू लिव्हिंग विदाउट फॅमिली सिस्टम. तर फॅमिली म्हणा किंवा ग्रुप म्हणा किंवा कोणाबरोबर
No, I think that is not put correctly. So I will just correct it so that we don't misunderstand anything. Krishnaji was opposed to family because family as a unit opposed to the rest of the society. That was not acceptable to him. Usually what happens is that people are so much identified with their family that they are only working for their own family interests. And then their family interests, if they put themselves against the rest of the society, then they don't mind going against the rest of the society. So they will be in conflict with the remaining society because they want to pursue their own family interest. Now that kind of thing was not acceptable to Krishnaji. A family or a group of persons opposed to the rest of the humanity, that is not acceptable. Right? So that is where one of the psychological law we mentioned in the morning, that what is not good for other is also not good for you. So whatever is not good for the rest of the humanity is also not good for your own family, because your family is part of the society. So if that law is understood, then it is not family against the rest of the society. Then family is part of the society, right? And then therefore the family will not do anything which will bring itself in conflict with the rest of the society. Although it may have its own interest, but it will not pursue those interests if they bring it in conflict with the rest of the society. So family is not to be taken as a very tight, consolidated entity opposed to the rest of the society. So that is what usually one sees, and therefore Krishnaji didn't approve of it. But
So
if there is a group of persons, but if there is a group of persons who are living in a group, but yet at the same time as part of the rest of the humanity, then there is no harm. Then there is nothing to worry about. Yes, Vijayji, you can add.
What he meant, he recommended that parents should come together and the children, and suppose one parent he is good at mathematics, just to give an example, so he should teach the son of somebody else who is interested in mathematics, so that sort of understanding should be there, and they not isolate themselves separately. He had written it somewhere. I don't remember where now.
No, that he talked in a different context when he was talking about schools and how parents can contribute to the school. So in that context, he was talking about this. Yeah, but what he is saying is that if there is a child, right, now that child belongs to your family, so you treat him in one way, and another child who doesn't belong to your family, you treat him in the other way, right? Now that is what is not right. I mean, to give an example, a boy's friend, boy's friend comes to that boy's house, and then that mother asks that fellow that, have you taken your breakfast? So the friend says, no, I have not taken. So she says, okay, then go back to your home, have your breakfast. Meanwhile, this boy will also have his breakfast.
Sir, but that will also depend on how much breakfast she has made, no?
Yeah.
If she
so
not
it
made
depends.
another person, she'll have to say.
In a culture where you are willing to share your things with others, right? There to have this kind of thing, may not be considered as courtesy, If that friend was offered the breakfast, and if the friend would have declined and he would have said that, well, I'll go back and have it come back, it's a different thing. But the person who should offer, he himself is suggesting, no, you go back to your home, have breakfast, and then come. So, which is like treating the members of your own family in a different way than the other people who are not members of your family. So that in Marathi they call it as Pankti Prapancha. So in Pankti Prapancha, there is a row of people sitting for meal, and in that row of people, you treat some persons favorably and treat some other persons unfavorably. So that is called as Pankti Prapanch. That is called the unacceptable discrimination. So to certain persons, you will always serve good sweets and other things, while to some other persons, you will not serve so many sweets. You will serve some other uninteresting things. So that is called as Pankti Prapancha, means you discriminate the people who are eating in a group, and you have to discriminate them. So you serve them differently. So that kind of behavior is not acceptable in a person who is into this kind of inquiry. So anyway, I think it's time to stop now. So we'll meet at 5:30 in the evening. Carry further this dialogue. Yeah. So I'm ending the meeting now. Yeah.
Yes, Kishore. Please.